All right, everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Today, we're going to be taking a trip back in time.
Oh, how far back are we going?
Back to 1989. Big year.
Hmm. Can't say that rings a bell immediately. What happened in 89?
Well, in England and Wales, something pretty major. Their water industry went private.
Oh, wow. Okay, that is big. And what's our source material for this? Some government report?
Actually, it's a prospectus outlining the whole privatization scheme.
A prospectus, like the kind companies use to attract investors?
Yep, that's the one.
Interesting. Sounds a bit dry, no? Lots of numbers and legalese, I'd imagine.
You'd think so, but honestly, it's way more than that. It's a real time capsule. Captures all the worries, the hopes, even the legal battles, all swirling around this huge decision. A decision that, by the way, impacted millions of people.
Yeah, you're right. Water is, well, essential. It's not like selling off a car company or something.
Exactly. So we're going to dig into who the major players were, the rules they put in place, and what it all meant for ordinary people, and the environment.
Sounds like a plan. So how did they even get to this point? I mean, was it just, boom, one day water's public, the next it's private?
Not quite. There was a sort of stepping stone. Back in '73, get this, they had all these local authorities managing water. Tons of them.
Yeah, I can imagine. Different towns, different systems.
Right. So they shift you from that to these bigger regional water authorities.
Ah, so like one authority per region. Makes sense.
Exactly. These authorities, they did it all. Supply, treatment, kept the rivers clean, even managed stuff like recreational use.
Wow, the whole package. But then come in '89 with this Water Act and things change, eh?
That's where the big shift happens. They create these private water holding companies, 10 of them, and they're the ones in charge now.
So no more regional authorities, just these private companies?
Well, each company had these subsidiary water service companies, but yeah, those private companies, they took over everything the water authorities used to handle.
Each one got a specific region, right?
You got it. Like they sliced up the water pie, basically based on those old water authority boundaries.
Smart way to divide things up, I guess. Less confusion that way.
Yeah, and they didn't just hand over the keys to these companies. The whole sell-off was meticulously planned.
Oh, I bet. This was a big deal. Millions of customers, tons of infrastructure, had to be done carefully.
Oh, absolutely. This is where we get to the combined offers for sale bit. The thing that really struck me was how much they emphasized public ownership.
Public ownership. But I thought we were talking about privatization.
We are. But get this, nearly 80% of each company's shares, they were offered to the public.
Seriously, so everyday people could buy a piece of the water company.
Yep. They even had specific amounts set aside for customers, employees, even pensioners of those companies.
Wow, a real effort to get everyone on board.
It seems that way, but there's a catch. You couldn't just buy the shares outright. Think of it like a layaway plan for owning a piece of the water industry.
A layaway plan. For shares? Now that's a new one on me. How did that work?
You paid in 3 installments, one when you applied, then another in July '90, and the final one a year later.
Spread out the cost, I get it. But were there, like, penalties if you missed a payment?
Oh yeah, they were serious about those deadlines. The government could resell your shares if you missed a payment.
And you'd lose out.
Potentially, yeah, they might not give you all your money back. So yeah, a bit of pressure there.
Wow, high stakes. Okay, so we've got these private companies running the show now. How do you make sure they don't just go wild, jack up prices or neglect the system?
That's where those regulators come in, like referees in a really important water polo match.
Uh-huh, I like that analogy. Keeping things fair.
Exactly. So yeah, the Director General of Water Services, this pretty powerful figure, they set the price limits.
Price limits, so they couldn't just charge whatever they wanted.
Nope. These limits, they're called K values. They dictated how much companies could charge for their services.
Ah, so a way to protect consumers from outrageous water bills.
Exactly. But what if costs went up unexpectedly? Like, say, a big drought hits and they need to do more treatment or something.
Good point. Did they account for that?
Oh, yeah, they thought of that. K wasn't just set in stone. The Director General could adjust it based on things like inflation, cost of capital, even changes in those environmental standards.
So built-in flexibility. Makes sense.
And if some crazy event happened, something totally unexpected, they had specific K adjustments.
Specific K adjustments sounds official.
Right. So they had all these tools to deal with the unexpected.
Smart. But what about the environmental impact of all this? I mean, giving companies the power to profit off of a resource like water, that sounds a little risky, doesn't it?
That's where the National Rivers Authority comes in, or NRA for short. They were like the environmental watchdogs. Their job was to make sure these companies weren't just dumping pollution into rivers, estuaries, all those waterways.
Ah, the protectors of the blue gold. So they had some real power then to actually tell those companies no.
Absolutely. They had these things called discharge consents. They were like permits, limiting how much and what kinds of pollutants the companies could release. And the prospectus, it specifically calls out lead, aluminum, even this tiny bug called cryptosporidium as big concerns.
Cryptosporidium, is that bad?
Yeah, you don't want that in your drinking water. Nasty outbreaks. But speaking of drinking water, how did they even make sure it was safe back then? Was the technology as advanced as it is today?
Well, it wasn't just sticking a straw in the river and calling it a day. They had these multi-stage treatment processes even back then.
Multi-stage what, like a video game with different levels?
Haha, kind of. First, they had these screens to remove large debris, branches, leaves, that sort of thing. Then it went into primary sedimentation.
Sedimentation. Sounds sciencey.
Basically, they just let the water sit in these big tanks. The heavy solids sink to the bottom like mud and stuff.
Okay, so far so good. What happens next?
Then comes the really interesting stuff. They use these biological processes in the secondary treatment to break down organic matter.
Biological processes, like bacteria and stuff.
Exactly. And for water going to particularly sensitive areas, they even had a tertiary treatment stage to remove even more impurities.
Wow, so 3 levels of filtering.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it. All that goes into getting clean water to our taps, even back then.
And of course, what goes in must come out. What about the sewage?
Ah, yes, the other side of the water coin. Just as important, but maybe not as pleasant to think about. But the water service companies, they were in charge of all that too, maintaining those public sewers and treating the sewage.
So what do they do with all that stuff?
Well, just like with water treatment, sewage treatment had multiple stages. First, they used primary sedimentation and to separate the solids from liquids.
So same principle, different ingredients.
Right. Then it came secondary treatment to break down the organic matter even further, get rid of harmful bacteria and other things you definitely don't want floating around.
Makes sense. So that's 2 levels down. What about the leftover sludge? Where does all that end up?
That's the big question, and one that they were already grappling with even back in '89. Sewage sludge, it's not something you can just ignore.
Definitely not. Did they have solutions back then?
They were using things like land application, basically using it as fertilizer,
Oh, okay. Anything else?
or incineration to reduce the volume.
I see. So turning waste into resources or just getting rid of it altogether. Smart. But I imagine both of those methods come with, potential environmental impacts.
Oh, absolutely. It's a trade-off, and that's something we'll definitely unpack further in the next part of our deep dive.
Looking forward to it. We'll delve into how they tried to balance keeping water affordable for the everyday person, ensuring those profits for the companies, and safeguarding the environment all at the same time. Okay, so we're back, diving deeper into this whole water privatization thing. Last time we left off talking about sewage treatment, the not-so-glamorous part of the water industry.
Essential, though. Can't forget about that.
Right. But this prospectus, it's not all about pipes and sludge and stuff. It's about trying to find that sweet spot, where customers can afford their water, that companies can make a profit, and we're not trashing the environment in the process.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, isn't it? And one thing that really stands out is how detailed they were about the financials. Remember those shares we talked about, the ones you could buy in installments?
Yeah, the layaway plan for water company ownership.
Exactly. The prospectus doesn't just say, hey, here's the payment plan. It goes into what happens if you miss a payment.
Oh yeah, the government could swoop in and resell those shares, and you might not even get your money back.
It's like, don't mess with the deadlines. Shows how serious they were about making this whole privatization thing work.
High stakes indeed. But let's talk about the real heavy lifting here, the infrastructure. All those pipes, treatment plants, the sewers. But I mean, how do you even put a price tag on all of that? It's not like buying a used car, right?
That's what I was thinking. There's no Kelly Blue Book for sewer systems.
Exactly. So how do they do it?
Well, the accountants had to get creative, let me tell you. They had to differentiate between infrastructure assets, like the actual pipes and sewers themselves, and other assets, things like buildings, equipment, vehicles.
So basically, separating what's buried underground from what's above ground.
You got it. Now, here's where it gets interesting. With infrastructure, they focused on maintaining its operating capability. They didn't depreciate it over time, like you normally would with other assets.
Wait, why not depreciate it? I mean, most things lose value as they get older, right?
True, but think about it this way. A network of pipes, if it's well maintained, it's designed to last for decades, maybe even centuries. It's not like a truck that wears out and needs to be replaced every few years.
So it's more like saying, okay, we're not worried about the pipes losing value. We just need to make sure they stay in good shape.
Precisely. They're factored in those ongoing maintenance costs, recognizing that those pipes weren't going anywhere anytime soon.
Makes sense. So the buildings and trucks, those depreciate normally, but the pipes and sewers, different story.
Yep. And all this careful accounting, it wasn't just for show. It was crucial for setting those price limits, those K values we talked about.
Right, the ones the Director General used to control how much the companies could charge. It sounds like they were walking a tightrope, trying to let the companies make a decent profit while also protecting customers from getting gouged.
Absolutely. It was all about balance. And the prospectus, it lays out all these different ways they could review and adjust those prices over time. Inflation, operating costs, changes in environmental regulations. They built in some flexibility to respond to all that.
So it wasn't just set it and forget it. They were constantly evaluating and tweaking the system.
That's right. But even with those price controls, how do you guarantee good service? What's to stop those companies from cutting corners to boost their profits?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. Is it all just about trust?
Well, trust but verify, right? The director general's role went beyond just setting prices. They were also like quality control inspectors, making sure those companies were meeting their obligations and providing decent service.
So if a company was slacking off, there were real consequences.
Oh, yeah. The director general could impose penalties, even revoke a company's appointment, basically kick them out of the water game if they weren't performing.
Wow, no messing around. But how would they even know if a company was messing up? Did they rely on customer complaints?
Complaints were part of it, but remember those customer service committees, those CSCs we mentioned?
Yeah, the customer watchdogs. Were they more than just a suggestion? I mean, did they actually have any power?
Oh, they had some teeth, for sure. They were there to handle complaints, yeah, but also to provide information to customers and make recommendations.
Recommendations to who? The companies.
To the companies and to the director general. And the prospectus is very clear. The director general had to seriously consider the CSC's views when making decisions.
So they weren't just a rubber stamp. They had real influence.
Exactly. They built a system where customer voices were heard and taken seriously. But all this infrastructure, it doesn't maintain itself, right? We talked about investment, but how did they actually ensure that those companies were putting money back into the system?
Yeah, how do you make sure they're not just pocketing the profits and letting things crumble?
That's where those asset management plans came in. Big, long-term plans detailing how they were going to maintain and improve all that infrastructure.
Okay, so like a roadmap for fixing leaks, upgrading treatment plants, all of that.
You got it. And it wasn't just a wish list. The director general had to review and approve those plans, make sure they were thorough, and crucially, that they were actually funded.
So another layer of oversight to protect the system in the long run. But all those upgrades, they cost money, right? Did the companies have to shoulder all of that themselves?
Well, that's where those K values come back in. The companies could request adjustments to their price limits to cover those big investments.
So if they needed to build a new treatment plant or replace a bunch of pipes, they could make a case for raising prices.
Exactly. But it wasn't just a free pass to raise prices willy-nilly. The director general had to be convinced that the investments were truly necessary and the costs were reasonable.
So check and balances on the spending, too. I'm starting to see how they tried to create this system that was fair to everyone, customers, companies, the environment. But did they consider the future at all? I mean, beyond just fixing what was already there, was there any emphasis on research, new technologies, that sort of thing?
That's a great question. And yes, they did recognize that the water sector can't just stand still. They actually emphasized the importance of research and development.
So they weren't just stuck in the past, focused on patching up the old ways of doing things.
Right. The water service companies, they were actually expected to contribute to this national research program managed by the Foundation for Water Research.
So it was a collaborative effort, pooling resources to find better solutions. That's encouraging.
It shows they understood that future challenges, things like water scarcity, or pollution, those would require new thinking, new approaches.
It's like they were acknowledging that privatization wasn't just about handing over the keys. It was about fostering a culture of innovation.
Precisely. But we can't forget about the environment. We've talked about the NRA and their watchdog role. But how did they actually enforce those environmental regulations? Did they have any real teeth?
Yeah, could they actually do something if a company was polluting?
Oh, yeah, they had some bite. They could do inspections, take water samples, really monitor what was going on. And if a company violated its discharge consent, those limits on what they could release into the water, the NRA could step in and impose fines, even prosecute them.
So real consequences for breaking the rules. But those discharge consents, they weren't all the same, right? We talked about different types. How did they decide what limits to set for each company?
Well, they recognized that a cookie-cutter approach wouldn't work. So they had these numerical consents, which were pretty specific. They set strict limits on certain pollutants. And then they had descriptive consents, which were used for smaller sewage treatment works.
So a bit more flexibility for the smaller guys.
Right, but still with the goal of minimizing environmental impact.
Makes sense. But even with all these measures in place, I can't help but think about that elephant in the room, the sewage sludge.
Ah, yes, the gift that keeps on giving. We talked about how they were struggling with how to dispose of it safely.
Any progress on that front? Did they come up with any brilliant solutions?
Well, they laid out the options they were considering, mostly land application, using it as fertilizer and incineration. But they also emphasized the need for careful management, making sure it's done safely and responsibly.
Yeah, you don't want to be spreading pollutants around or polluting the air with poorly managed incineration.
Exactly. So permits, monitoring, all of that was crucial. But remember, this was 1989. The science around sewage treatment has come a long way since then.
That's true. So it seems like they were trying to strike a balance between keeping water affordable, letting companies make a profit, and protecting the environment. But we can't forget that not everyone was on board with this whole privatization idea.
Oh yeah, there was definitely pushback. The prospectus even mentions opposition from groups like the Labor Party. They argued that water should stay public, managed for the benefit of everyone, not for private profit.
So a clash of ideologies, really.
Yeah, and it wasn't just a war of words, there were actual legal challenges.
Oh, from whom?
Some local authorities felt they had a claim to some of the assets that were being transferred to those water service companies.
So they were saying, hey, wait a minute, that stuff belongs to us.
Essentially, the prospectus goes into detail about the government's response, basically arguing that those claims didn't hold water.
Aha, nice pun.
Yeah, I couldn't resist. But it just shows how controversial this whole thing was.
It was a big gamble, that's for sure. And it sparked a lot of debate, and that debate continues today.
Absolutely. It raises fundamental questions about how we manage essential resources, who benefits, who pays. Really important stuff to think about.
All right, welcome back for the final part of our deep dive. We've been through a lot with this 1989 water privatization scheme. The history, the financials, the regulations, the whole balancing act of keeping everyone happy. But the big question remains, did it actually work?
The million-dollar question, right? Did all this effort actually deliver? Well, like most things in life, it's not a simple yes or no answer.
Figures. All right, let's hear it. What were some of the biggest hurdles they faced? What went wrong?
Well, just the sheer scale of it all, 10 new companies taking over this massive network of infrastructure, employees used to doing things a certain way.
Yeah, it's not like flipping a switch.
Exactly. And these companies were now operating in a whole new world, a profit-driven one. They had shareholders breathing down their necks, expecting returns on their investments.
So pressure to perform, to cut costs, boost those share prices.
Right. And that created some tension, especially when it came to balancing the need for investment with, keeping those costs down and those profits up.
The classic short-term versus long-term dilemma. Did that tension lead to any real problems?
Well, some critics argued that, some companies became too focused on those short-term gains, maybe neglecting those crucial infrastructure upgrades.
So potentially leading to, leaky pipes, sewage overflows, even water shortages down the line.
Potentially, yeah. Though, to be fair, it's important to remember those problems didn't just magically appear with privatization. The water and sewage systems in England and Wales, they were already aging, in need of serious attention, even before the private companies took over.
So kind of like they inherited a house that needed a new roof, but maybe they put off those repairs to make the monthly payments look better?
That's a good analogy, but let's not dwell on the negatives. There were definitely some wins, some real successes that came out of this privatization.
Okay, I'm ready for some good news. What did they get right?
Well, one of the biggest positives was a significant increase in investment. Remember those asset management plans? They weren't just empty promises. Companies poured billions into upgrading treatment plants, replacing pipes, expanding capacity.
So actual tangible improvements that should have led to, better water, more reliable service.
Exactly. And a lot of this was driven by that regulatory framework, the K values, the threat of penalties if they didn't meet standards. The system was designed to reward good performance or at least penalize bad performance.
Carrots and sticks, eh? Classic approach. But what about customer service? Did that improve under private management?
This is another area where they saw positive results. Those customer service committees, the CSEs, they really proved their worth.
So they weren't just a PR stunt. They actually had some clout.
They did. They helped resolve complaints, pushed for improvements, even influenced those industry-wide codes of practice. They were a voice for the customer, making sure those companies weren't just ignoring their concerns.
It sounds like they gave the customers a seat at the table, which is good. But let's not forget about the environmental side of things. Did privatization lead to any real progress there? Cleaner water, healthier ecosystems?
Well, that's where the creation of the National Rivers Authority, the NRA, was crucial. As an independent watchdog, they had real power to enforce those environmental regulations, and they didn't shy away from using it.
So a win for the environment.
In many ways, yes. Their focus on those water quality objectives, their willingness to hold polluters accountable, it led to some pretty significant improvements in the health of those rivers and waterways. Of course, challenges remained, like finding ways to deal with that pesky sewage sludge and balancing those industrial needs with environmental protection.
Yeah, complex problems rarely have simple solutions. But it sounds like they made some headway. So after all this unpacking, all this back and forth, what's the final verdict? Was privatization a success or a failure?
Honestly, it's complicated. Like most big changes, there were both positive and negative outcomes. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it did lead to some major improvements in investment, customer service, and environmental protection.
It sounds like a mixed bag, but what are some of the big takeaways, the lessons we can learn from this whole experiment? for managing resources in the future.
One of the clearest lessons is that privatization isn't a magic bullet. It's not just about handing things over to the private sector and walking away. You need careful planning, strong regulations, and a constant effort to keep all those competing interests in check.
So it's not a one-time fix, it's an ongoing process with constant adjustments and oversight.
Exactly. And another crucial lesson is the importance of strong environmental safeguards. Privatization can work, but only if you have those regulations in place and an agency like the NRA with the power to enforce them.
You need that watchdog, that independent voice. What else? Anything else we can take away from all this?
Well, the 1989 privatization really highlighted the importance of giving customers a voice. Those customer service committees, they proved that feedback mechanisms, ways for customers to raise concerns and hold companies accountable, they're absolutely essential.
So listen to the people who are actually using the service, right? Make sure they have a way to speak up.
Exactly. And finally, this whole deep dive really underscores the importance of research and development. We're facing some big challenges when it comes to water, climate change, population growth, pollution. We need new ideas, new technologies, new ways of thinking to ensure a sustainable water future.
Innovation is key, always moving forward. Well, it's been quite a journey, hasn't it? This 1989 privatization. It was a pivotal moment, for sure, not without its flaws, but definitely a fascinating case study in how we manage those essential resources, like water.
And remember, this is just the starting point. We encourage everyone to dig deeper, explore the source material, and keep asking those tough questions.
That's what it's all about. Curiosity, exploration, and a healthy dose of skepticism.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, folks, that wraps up another deep dive. Until next time, keep those minds engaged and stay thirsty for knowledge.